Associate Professor Walter Theseira.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I support the ministerial statement that Singaporeans should be united in standing against hate speech for the protection of racial and religious harmony in Singapore. I support the broad principle that we should have a calibrated approach to addressive offensive speech that may injure racial and religious harmony. But that is a motherhood statement, so let me get down to details. Sir, I do not think it is sufficient for the government as a matter of public policy to take religions and cultures as they are when deciding what is offensive speech. There are inherent contradictions between the great and historic truths embodied in different religious and cultural traditions. When these contradictions surface in public, people may and do take offense. This contradiction can only be resolved with the state promoting an enlightened and neutral secularism that respects all religions and races, but which also firmly pushes back in attempts to encroach on the public space to the detriment of all. Sir, let me explain what I mean by this basic contradiction. I believe this House accepts that every major religion has at heart certain great truths about the purpose of life and the way we should live a meaningful life. Those who are non-religious also seek meaning and purpose in life. This is a natural response to the question of human existence. But the problem is that all these great truths cannot be truthful all at once. And even if by divine providence they are, human practice inevitably corrupts the truth. Because great truths compel us to put principles into practice, the end result is that offense can and will be taken. Consider the following. Christianity would not exist if Jesus had not driven out the merchants and the money changers from the temple and created the conditions for a social revolution. The Protestant churches would not exist if Martin Luther had not published his 95 Theses against the abuses of the medieval Catholic Church. Islam would not exist if the Prophet, peace be upon him, had not put divine revelation into practice by mobilizing society against the injustice of his time. All of these acts, while creating great religions, would have caused great offense to the entrenched communities of the time. The problem is that belief and culture are not just private matters. The world's great religions are great because they provide us a framework of how to live. The racial groups that make up Singapore likewise have centuries of culture and practice which still guide modern life. And so it is inevitable that one man's belief or culture, when put into the public sphere, may give offense to another. A basic example is the prohibition on food, which can be religious or cultural. What do you do when simple consumption of food in plain sight, whether it's pork, beef, alcohol, other animals, is normal to some but gives offense to others? What about refusal to consume a food that is thought to be consecrated to another religion or to be unclean? What if that also gives offense? Sir, the list could go on, but the point is clear. This is the essential contradiction we are faced with. A great truth that motivates people to live their lives according to a higher purpose must at some point face entrenched interests in different ways of life. As a result, many great truths, when put into practice, will be regarded as deeply offensive, just as others regarded as the gospel truth. What then should the state do? First, I believe the state should reinforce a secular public policy space based on the founding principle that we are a multiracial and religious society. The public space is a common resource, a deep wellspring that sustains and refreshes the common spirit. If we had one overwhelmingly dominant religion and or race, then the question is just one of tolerance of minorities and not of what the public space should be like. But as a multiracial and religious society, each of our communities has different ideas about that public space. Our society must keep that common wellspring clear. If we each seek to dye the water according to our own particular persuasion, we will soon find that there is nothing but darkness there. Therefore, the state must directly address, manage, and even reject when necessary attempts by religious and ethnic groups to advance public policy based on their own versions of the truth. This is so even when several religions or groups claim common cause. To take a current issue, many Singaporean Christians and Muslims believe that homosexual behavior is offensive to their ideals of what the public space and the family should be. This is not the time to debate these views. The point is, what is offensive to one group may not be so to another. To advocate public policy on the basis of shared religious interests or a common feeling of offense across groups risks normalizing a dangerous principle that religiously or racially held interests can shape the public sphere. Once that principle is normalized, no single religion or racial group can feel safe. Next, our religious and racial communities must accept that they have a role to play in balancing the public exercise of their faith with an understanding that sensitivity bordering on intolerance will inevitably put each community against the other. Sir, we are witnessing a shift towards the more public assertion of faith. While the vast majority today agree that our laws should not be based on religion, personal conscience matters. In the 2019 Religion in Singapore, the Private and Public Spheres Institute of Policy Studies report, Matthews, Lim, and Selvarajan found that nearly 2 in 3 Christians, Catholics, and Muslims claimed they would follow religious principles over a conflicting secular law. Moreover, a substantial minority of Christians, Catholics, and Muslims believe it is acceptable for religious leaders to speak on changes to the law which are in conflict with religious principles. Taken by itself, there is nothing wrong with putting principles into action this way. It is an authentic expression of the human spirit in public life. But the question for us is whether we are able to accept and make such religiously motivated arguments without giving or taking offense, and whether we can come to a consensus to accept a settled question of public policy even when it conflicts with our personal principles. In short, any assertiveness based on religious principle must be matched by an equal open-mindedness to accept honest disagreements without taking offense. Sir, government policy cannot replace the role of the community. I agree that government must continue to pursue a balanced framework that considers deep-seated harm to an entire community, and not just the most sensitive members of that community. But what happens when the tenor of sensitivity changes with time, and what was formerly regarded as a secular problem becomes an article of faith? This is not an abstract problem. Even a balanced framework will be gradually driven into a corner where everything causes an offense and nothing is accepted if our racial and religious groups become more intolerant over time. So we are back to the deep question: who gets to decide if something gives offense? This debate will not settle the question. I share the Minister's views that it must be taken outside to the public as well, but I have 2 principles to offer. First, the question of offense cannot simply be left to community views given the strict laws we have in place. In a multi-religious and racial society, this may lead to the weaponization of the law against other communities and the public space, as Professor Cherian George has argued. The state must work with the community to robustly defend the public space. Second, intent must be considered together with the question of offense. When the intention is to honestly criticize or to promote an alternative social or religious principle that conflicts with entrenched interests, this is the contest of ideas at work, and we suppress it at our own peril. Indeed, the early Catholic Church, Islam, and the Protestant Church spread despite repression because society recognized the great truth embodied in these religious ideals. Academics, journalists, and civil society alike need the freedom to ask and answer inconvenient questions about race and religion that may offend some. Of course, some honestly held views today are considered so offensive that I do not think we will see them contested openly in the near future. The issue of conversion is also deeply sensitive. But that does not mean we should not try to advance the principle that intent matters and not just the degree of offense taken. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as the government notes, Singapore's racial and religious harmony is not a natural product. It is the result of careful cooperation between the state and society. But we should go beyond just taking community views or considerations as given. To do otherwise would be to cede the public space slowly over time as each community uses their power to shape the public space in accordance with their own way of life. Sir, the good thing about being a multiracial and religious society is each of us will quickly realize in one sphere or another of life, we are a minority. We must promote an enlightened secularism to protect the public space in the interest of all. We must remember that while each of us belong to minorities of our own, we share a common spirit as human beings and as citizens of Singapore. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I support the motion.